one of the things I talk about is what I call the 3 Ps, which is we tend to make the belief three things. One is personal. So it's not, I failed at something, it's I'm a failure. The second is permanent. So it's not, I just failed at this one thing one time, it's I always fail. And then we tend to make it pervasive. So not only did I fail at this one thing, I fail at everything. So it's I'm a failure who fails all the time at everything. And when you make it sound like that in your head, and don't get me wrong, there's a good reason that internal voice exists, and it's kind of doing that. It's trying to protect you, but it says these things. So it tells you don't try, don't change, don't do anything different, don't change who you are, don't examine who you are, because that's going to hurt. That's going to feel like an attack. And yet the reality is doing that self-work is 90% of the time going to move you further towards success. But it just hurts. It's painful.
Welcome to They're Not Like Us, the podcast where bold ideas and inspiring stories come to life. I'm your host, Aaron, here to challenge the norms and ignite your potential. If you're ready to level up, don't forget to subscribe and join the movement. Now, let's dive in. Hello, welcome back to They're Not Like Us. I'm your host, Aaron, and today I'm joined by Scott Maderer. Is that correctly pronounced, Scott?
It's actually Maderer is
Maderer.
how you pronounce it. I know,
Maderer.
trust me, you're in good company pronouncing it the way you did.
No worries. Scott, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. So I'm a full-time coach. I live in the U.S. in South Texas, in a house in Bryan. My wife and I just recently moved here. Previous to that, she and I lived out kind of in the middle of nowhere, where we used to drive an hour to go to the grocery store, and now we drive 15 minutes, and there's 4 of them. So kind of a big change for us this year. My adult son is doing well, and he lives about 4 hours north of us. What I do as a coach, I consider myself, I call myself a stewardship coach. So I help small business owners master their time, their talent, and their treasures so that they can live out their calling. So basically what that means is most of the time, these are folks that either have a business or they wish that they had a business. They feel like they're struggling. They don't have enough time. They don't have enough money. They're not able to do that. They want help in those areas. And then what I jokingly say is I trick them, because we usually don't actually work on time and money directly. We work on the third piece, which is talent, because how you handle your time and how you handle your money is really about how you handle yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that, actually. And, a lot of us don't think of it that way, I think, is the problem.
Yeah. Well, you're looking for an app to fix it. You want a tool that'll fix it. You want to and don't get me wrong, there's apps that you can use, and there's tools that you can use, there's techniques that you can use, and those things are all helpful, but that's not the real problem. The real problem is usually the mindset, the belief, how are you interacting with things, your relationship with it. Because even with an app, it's like you can have the perfect app that would really help you, but then how do you actually use it? How do you actually implement it? What are you doing with it? I know people that have had a tool. It's a good tool. They use it for about 2 weeks and then they stop using it. Well, that's not going to work, So that has less to do with the tool and more to do with you.
Yeah, I think that's true of most things in life, really. We're always looking for that external fix, aren't we? That external solution, when often the solution is within it's us, right? We need to look at ourselves and kind of improve what we do and how we do it, and understanding it first and foremost. But I think that's something that we all kind of tend to avoid, really. I don't know why. Maybe it's a bit scary to turn that kind of light on yourself.
That, and I think it feels, it somehow or another that feels more difficult. That feels like an admission of failure. It feels, we tag it into our identity, who we are. If I'm not able to do this, well, it must mean something about me. So I talk about I talk about limiting beliefs. One of the things I talk about is what I call the 3 Ps, which is we tend to make the belief 3 things. One is personal. So it's not, I failed at something, it's I'm a failure. The second is permanent. So it's not, I just failed at this one thing one time, it's I always fail. And then we tend to make it pervasive. So not only did I fail at this one thing, I fail at everything. So it's I'm a failure who fails all the time at everything. And when you make it sound like that in your head, and don't get me wrong, there's a good reason that internal voice exists, and it's kind of doing that. It's trying to protect you, but it says these things. So it tells you, don't try, don't change, don't do anything different. Don't change who you are. Don't examine who you are, because that's going to hurt. That's going to feel like an attack. And yet the reality is doing that self-work is 90% of the time going to move you further towards success. But it just hurts. It's painful.
Yeah, and I agree as well. And I think it's one of those, isn't it? I think we have to fight against our own nature, because ultimately we're all just animals, really, and our body and our mind wants to survive first and foremost. That's the most important thing, is survival, really, to try and kind of keep us going. And obviously, if we feel threatened or that we're failing at something, then that can affect our social status, and because we're a social animal, that drives us down.
That's the
we
bigger
have that
fear.
perception, yeah, right.
Yeah, the biggest fear is actual. So when they measure, they have people rank things that they're afraid of, and things like public speaking. Always, people always use that as a great example. It shows up really high in the list. In fact, a lot of people rank, I'm more afraid of talking in public than I am of dying. They actually put meaning, think about this. If they're at a funeral, they would rather be in the coffin than delivering the eulogy. I mean, that's literally what that means, And yet, talking in front of people, I mean, really and truly, it shouldn't be something that we have that great big fear of. It's not like a lion is going to jump out and grab you and eat you on the stage. But why we're afraid of it is exactly what you said. It's that social fear that creates the fear, because the feeling is, if I do a bad job, nobody's going to like me, and they're going to kick me out of the tribe, and I'm going to be homeless and living under a bridge, and nobody's going to talk to me, and all of that. By the way, none of that is true, but it doesn't matter. That's kind of the script that runs in our head. And I always laugh and tell people, it's like, think for a minute. Have you ever sat in the audience while someone was speaking going, man, I can't wait till they screw up, because as soon as they do, I'm going to make fun of them and kick them out. It's like, no, you're on their side. You're like rooting for them. And yet that's kind of the perception we have is, yeah, but when I get up there, everyone's going to laugh at me. And it's like, no, it really doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, it's definitely tied into that whole social thing, and I think that's probably, like I say, because it's ingrained in us, isn't it? Probably because years ago, if you got thrown out of a tribe or of a group, that's probably death, right?
You died.
Yeah, so that's how important it is, and also your survival improves the higher up you are in that social group as well. Surely, the higher up you are, the better food you get and stuff like that.
The connections you have, the influence you have, and again, this is true. Our brain is wired for an environment that doesn't exist anymore, really and truly, where we lived in small tribal groups and we were very interdependent and that kind of thing. And that's not really 100% true anymore, yet we still have the wiring set up that way. And so it's a bit of that's where you use the phrase, kind of fight against your own nature. I prefer not to frame it as a fight, but rather coming to an understanding with it. I don't try to get rid of these feelings. I try to understand them and accept them. So like my inner voice actually has a name. Okay. His name is Harry, and Harry looks like a duck-billed platypus, but he's bright purple and he wears a party hat. Okay. And so when he shows up and starts talking to me, for me, it's just like, hey, Harry, there you are again. I greet it like an old friend, and I have the conversation, and, I know you're trying to protect me, but you know what? I'm going to go on that podcast anyway, or I'm going to go do that speaking event anyway, or I'm going to do that. Yeah. So it's not that I've gotten rid of it, not that I fight with it, but more that I understand it and kind of learn to dance with it in a way. Now, does that mean I still have fears and I still have limiting beliefs and I still have, absolutely, of course I do, because I'm human and I'm still breathing. So I do. But you begin to learn to adapt to them in a different way when you begin to understand what it is and where it's coming from, rather than just try to fight it and push it away and get rid of it.
Yeah, and I don't think we can ever get rid of it either. I think we're always going to have that doubt and some form of self-doubt or some form of self-talk. And
I've never met anyone who has. So
yeah, and I think we've got to find a way, like you're doing, to kind of frame it so that it's taken as a positive rather than a negative all the time. Because even if you're getting negative thoughts, you can allow them to kind of pass through you, acknowledge them, but not hold on to them, if you know what I mean. Because it's just holding on to them and taking that on board and thinking, oh yeah, that's who I am, and defining yourself by that negativity is what can really drive us down.
Well, and framing it, even so, a lot of times I try not to frame things as negative or positive, even using that as an example. Rather, it just is, the value judgment that we put upon it comes from us, not from the thing, and don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, oh, just do anything you want and all things are acceptable. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you're the one putting that filter of positive or negative. So as you approach things, there are some things that we would label negative that really and truly, if you step out and look at it a different way, you realize, well, it's not really negative. Obviously there are true things that are really bad or really good, but we're the ones that are putting that value on it. It doesn't exist in the thing itself. So take money, for example. I work with people in money area for a lot. A lot of folks have a relationship with money where, either they think the only way to be good is to be rich, or the opposite of that. All rich people are evil. All rich people are bad. There's this kind of ascribing to the money and the presence of money a value of goodness or badness. Well, the truth is money is just a tool. It's just money. You can do good things with money. You can do bad things with money. It doesn't really affect you unless you let it affect you. All it does is take what you are and give you the ability to kind of do it in a bigger way. So if you're a jerk and you get lots of money, a lot of times you end up being a bigger jerk. If you're a nice person and you get lots of money, a lot of times you end up being a nicer person, and you play that niceness out in a bigger way. So it's not the money, it's your character that already exists that it's magnifying. And so but we ascribe to the money the goodness or badness, again, in a way, because it's easier than looking at us or looking at ourselves and going, wait, what am I doing? What choices am I making? What am I doing with this money that allows me to have that kind of good or bad relationship with?
Yeah, and for some reason, I think we seem to be drawn to polarity as well, don't we? Rather than kind of accepting the grey areas in between and
Yep.
being like, actually, it's a lot more complex than good and evil, or
Yeah, I
rich and
taught
poor, and there's a dichotomy, isn't it, to everything? And we need to appreciate and understand that.
the nuance.
Yeah, because that's what actually that's where life is in that middle ground, in that grey area, and that's what we need to
Mm-hmm.
navigate and understand that even somebody who we see as a bad person, they probably do a lot of really good things as well. There's no such
Well,
thing as
or
like,
where did it come from?
yeah,
you know so yeah, you're actually the second book that I'm working on right now is around the very topic you're talking about. I talk about living in what I call the both and rather than the either or. So either or is where something is, left or right, something is up or down, something is conservative or liberal, something is good or bad. It's these dichotomies, put things in opposite boxes, and never the twain shall touch. If you're in that box, you're never in this box. And the truth is, for most things and for most people, it's a lot more nuanced than that. There's a lot more of a continuum. And so I refer to that as living in the both and, where you realize, I may see both this and that, which most people would say you can't possibly hold those two ideas in your head at the same time. And the ability to do that a lot of times is what allows you to see that nuance, to develop that strength, to frame things and see things in a way that's a little different than other folks. And I think it actually makes you more successful and more comfortable with a lot of things.
yeah, it's important to get to that point where you can kind of understand things from two different perspectives, and see that actually they both have merits, and there's something in between that we can kind of navigate and figure out with life. And you know, I mean, me for instance, I'd say I'm quite genuinely a nice person, genuinely, but I, I've had moments and done things I'm not proud of, and not
So
not
you're older
always,
than 12.
yeah, not always been perfect or happy. You know what I mean? In lots of ways. So there's no such thing. But for some reason, we and maybe this goes back to survival thing as well, and maybe this goes back to like evolution, where if something kind of poisoned you, then you'd stay away from that, and that's bad, always bad. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe it made it simpler to think in those terms, and that's kind of why we developed to think in that
Yeah,
way.
the name for it is heuristics, where we develop shortcuts in our brain so that we don't have to spend a lot of energy thinking about it. We can just jump to the conclusion. We don't have to do the in between of processing. So yeah, you're right. I mean, if when the bush rustles, sometimes there's a tiger hiding behind the bush that's going to jump out. It's easier to just assume bush rustling danger, than it is to go, I wonder, is the wind blowing? Is there a tiger? What should I do? And by the time you've done all of that, if there was a tiger, the tiger's jumped out and eaten you. So you kind of take the shortcut of just assuming there's danger. That's why we fall into the fight, flight, freeze kind of response so quickly. Same thing happens now with all sorts of things. That's where stereotypes and these sort of shortcut beliefs that we run into, again, all rich people are bad, all rich people are good. Neither one of those. If you stop and think for a minute empirically, most people would go, well, that can't possibly be true. There's got to be an exception to that somewhere. There's just one. All there has to do is literally be one person that doesn't follow that pattern, and it can't be all. So there's a billion people on the planet, surely there's one, that kind of thing. And yet that's what we do, because it's easier to do that than it is to spend the time and the energy and the effort, and the mental power to actually think about it. Because think about it, you've got a lot going on, you've got stuff coming at you all the time. You don't want to waste energy, and this is true, you don't want to waste energy on things, but yet there's still value. And this is kind of where, as a coach, part of what I do, in taking some of your energy and some of the time, taking a step back and examining some of those assumptions and some of those heuristics that you have, that programming that you have, taking a closer look at it, ripping it apart and going, is this really serving me as well as I think it is? Maybe I can develop a new shorthand or a new way of thinking or a new frame and look at something a little differently and actually be served better.
Scott, how do you get people to do that? Because, the way I look at it as well, life is kind of pushes people to, I say life, modern society is still pushing people to have these polarities as well. There's a lot of pushing, like social media and stuff like that.
We just went through
really
a presidential
good or really
election.
bad. Yeah, the elections. It's just like I think it kind of sells. I think people find it easier when it's something like really extreme one way or the other. So it sells newspapers. It's people lap it up on social media because it's just an easy.
Well, it also becomes part of our identity. It becomes part of who we are. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you kind of get people to start thinking differently, especially if they've been kind of locked in on that kind of way of thinking for so long?
It involves chains and a sledgehammer. No, not really. Honestly, the first step is they actually have to want to examine it. So I can't force anyone to do it. The only person you have control over is you. Even in I'm married. I don't have any control over my wife and my kid. I have influence with them, but I don't have control over them. At the end of the day, they get to make their own decisions. And so what the first step is, they actually have to decide, hey, I want to examine this. I want to listen. I want to have a conversation. And so in general, my approach as a coach is to, again, try to hold a judgment-free space and just get curious. It's less about telling someone they're right or they're wrong, because honestly, they're not. That's their belief system. And more about asking, okay, where did that come from? How is that serving you? What would you like to be different in your life? How could we look at things in a way that might move you towards that? It's asking questions as opposed to making statements, and really trying to understand, what do they believe? Where does it come from? Why did it develop? And what then do they want instead? Because once you kind of have that frame, then they begin looking for ways to shift, to adjust, to change. And that's when, you can do tools and techniques and do things like journaling and different exercises and that sort of stuff. But those exercises in a vacuum only reinforce the beliefs that already exist. Again, you use social media. Social media really is really good at echoing back to you what you already believe. So you look at it and you go, well, everyone believes the way I do, because that's all I see. It's like, well, yeah, that's not actually because everyone believes the way you do. That's just because you set it up in a way, not intentionally, but it's been set up in a way to feed back to you what you already believe. and confirm it. It's called confirmation bias. It's literally something that happens in our brain. So once you realize that's true, then you can start going, okay, well, how can I expose myself to other viewpoints, and go out and do that? Not because they're right. Maybe they're all wrong. I don't know. But at least I can become aware of the fact that, hey, not everyone believes the way I believe, and this echo chamber that I'm living in isn't because this is the only right way. Maybe there's another way, or maybe there's another idea, or maybe there's another thing. And who knows? Maybe you do all of that work and you discover, nope, I was right all along. That's possible. Most of the time, though, people kind of discover, you know what, there's more to this. There's some nuance here. I see that other person less now as this abstract idea and more as a human being. Now I can actually have a conversation. Now I can have a relationship. And again, as a coach, that's kind of what I try to approach it is that curiosity of, Aaron's Aaron. He's who he is. Let's talk, and I don't have to agree with Aaron. I don't have to look at him and go, you're right. But I do have to actually respect the fact that he's come to, he's an adult. He's an intelligent person. He's come to a belief system from somewhere, somehow. It's not abstract. It's not he's not an evil demon sitting over there drooling and, got to eat my children, that kind of thing. And yet that's kind of how we almost set it up to be these sort of dichotomies. So it's really, they have to want to change. And then it's holding the space to get curious and help them go through that process.
Yeah, that curiosity is a massive thing, right?
Absolutely. I tell coaches all the time, one of the big, I do a lot of coach training as well. And one of the biggest frames, I mean, it's literally important enough that it's on a card, at my desk. It says, ask more questions. We call it putting on your curiosity hat. And so somebody will say something, and it may even be something really shocking, something that I'm surprised to hear. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more, as opposed to, really? And now, am I perfect at that? Of course not, because I'm human. Do I try to hold that kind of space for people? Absolutely. And, I think I'm reasonably good at it, but it's something that you have to work at to do too. It doesn't come easy.
Yeah, it does take practice. And I think that curiosity, if we are allowing ourselves to be more curious and naturally are more curious, then we will learn a lot more, and we will kind of, it's like you said earlier about, oh, I'm not all bad, I'm this, that, the other, because, I've come to the way I believe through experiences, really, through experiences and through things I've learned through other people. But as soon as you close that door, which is what I find, people get to a certain age and they kind of close that door, and then they don't take on any new viewpoints, and then that's them kind of rigidly stuck in that way of thinking. Whereas, like, if you can keep that door open and always kind of understand, appreciate other people's point of views, where they've come from, why they believe certain things, then that really gets you thinking and challenging some of your beliefs and the way that you think. And like you say, even if you keep your belief, it may actually just change one or two little things about it. It might be like, oh, actually, I really still believe
whatever
in this particular in this particular thing, but actually it's a bit more complex than I originally gave it credit for, and it kind of opens your mind up to it a bit. And I think that helps, especially with like business and stuff like that, because that helps us think more innovatively as well. I think it allows us to think of outside of the box a little bit more.
Well, and it allows us to take on that same curiosity. So, take a business owner. Most business owners will tell you, oh, I have great customer service. Have you actually ever asked your customers, and would they agree with you, because a lot of times, because you haven't examined it, you just assumed, well, I must be doing what my customers want because they keep coming back and buying from me again. That's actually not a good measure of the fact that they think you have good customer service. There's a million reasons they could keep buying from you, only one of which is customer service. So there's, again, that idea of getting curious yourself and starting to examine things, around you as a business owner. I've heard business owners that it's like, oh, I have huge turnover. I have employee after employee after employee quit. I just can't find good workers. People today don't want to work. Really? Is that really is that the only possible conclusion to that scenario? Well, no. Okay, there may be more going on. Get curious and start figuring out. And a lot of times, all of a sudden, they figure out there's things maybe they're doing, or their management team is doing, or whatever. And by the way, it's not about pizza parties and paying people more. Those things aren't bad, but that's usually not what keeps people around. What keeps people around is things like autonomy and feeling like there's a purpose to what they're doing and understanding how what they're doing fits into the bigger picture and these sorts of things. Well, how can you do that for your employees? How can you help them be part of the process? Then all of a sudden it's like, wow, we've got great employees. It's the exact same people, and it's like all you changed was the environment, and it changes. So it's this idea of you being open to changing and examining your own views then allows you to become open for other things. And as an individual, as a business owner, that almost always leads to more success and more growth and more influence and more impact because you begin to have that connection to other folks.
Yeah, those three things are huge as well. And I think, so many organizations and companies fall short on that kind of understanding that if you give people purpose and that autonomy to make things happen themselves and feel like they're part of that bigger picture, they're achieving things, moving forward, driving the needle forward, then they'll be like a completely different person to, what a lot of people think of even kind of. So I've worked in leadership roles, and you get new generations come through, younger generations come through, and they're different and they operate differently.
Yep.
And then the instant thing is people just go, oh, they're just lazy, they're bad, they're this, they're that. Well, actually, no, you just micromanaging them a little bit. You're not giving them any purpose. You're not giving them any kind of role to play with, and you're not giving them that kind of big picture where they fit in, what they're doing in the organization. So then they just lose an interest. So I completely understand it from their perspective, but
Well,
a lot of people don't
and a
get
lot
it.
of times they just work differently, and that different doesn't mean good or bad. It just means different. So same thing. I've been in leadership positions and had other leaders be like, I can't believe that so and so pulls out their phone during their meetings and looks at their phone, and it's like, okay, but are they listening? Well, yeah, they hear everything we say. Are they doing their job? Yeah, they're doing Are they achieving everything you want them to achieve? Yes. But it's rude for them to pull out their phone. Have you talked to them about why you see that as rude? Have you had a conversation with them about why they're doing it and what's going on? And then they discover that actually what they're doing and the reason they have their phone out is because they're using their phone to take notes. They're not taking notes on a piece of paper. They're writing on the notes app on their phone, or capturing notes that way. Oh, I didn't even know that's what they were doing. Yeah, because you never asked. You just assumed they were playing Candy Crush and whatnot. So we make these weird assumptions because that's not how we would do it, that it must be bad. And it's like, well, maybe not. Let's get curious and find out more about what's going on. And I use that as a simplistic example, but the truth is, yeah, in leadership, we do this all the time. There's studies that show that leaders tend to hire people that have the exact same personality type as them. Why?
That doesn't make any sense to me, because surely that you want to kind of diversify that skill set and have people who are actually probably better at the opposite things, who's like
Right.
almost the opposite. Yes, it might be difficult to kind of at the start to figure out that relationship and get an understanding and work that middle ground, but actually them having that different skill set will actually probably boost
Probably
you more than
stronger.
having the same skill set.
Yep. But it's uncomfortable. And now I have to change. I have to work to communicate. I have to learn how to adapt and do something different. And by the way, that's on you as the leader. That's not on them as the employee. You as the leader have to become aware of these things and learn to do things differently, because that's part of your job. That's why you're in the leadership position, so that you can use the team effectively. And so that's part of it. It's like, well, I know how to talk to people like me, so I don't have to do any extra work. So it's easier. So I'm just going to do that. And again, they don't say that out loud. That's not like a conscious thought, but that's effectively what they're doing. And then it becomes self-reinforcing because the team, the team wants people that are easier to work with, and so they want you to hire those people. And pretty soon you end up with, like you said, a group that kind of all has the same viewpoint, all has the same skills, all has the same personality. And that probably means there's some gaps and there's some oversights and there's some things that they can't do well. Now that leads to problems and friction. And you've got all of the things that you end up with in a lot of teams because they haven't actually thought it through and learned to work with others and everything else. It also leads to customer problems. If they're directly facing customers, guess what? They want to work with customers who are like them. So if there's one, let's say there's 4 personality types and you only hire one of them, that's 3/4 of your customer base that isn't being served well. Right there is a problem. So unless you teach them, now again, can you teach people to communicate across personalities? Yes, you can, but you have to work to do that, and you have to train to do that, and you as a leader have to be aware that that's even something that needs to happen. And usually if you're the leader that's just kind of hiring the same team that looks and acts and sounds the same as you're not going to do that extra effort to teach them to do that, and so you've actually got all sorts of business problems.
Yeah, I think it's going to be massive problems, really, if you're all kind of that similar. Like you say, you need that challenge. It comes back to what we were talking about earlier, doesn't it? With that kind of closed-minded, polarity. You're all on this one end, and then you've got nobody balancing you out and kind of bringing you back to the middle, really.
Well, and let's even take it to the extreme and say, if you're a solopreneur out there, it's because I work with a lot of solopreneurs. Think it for a minute. By definition, you have a team that is all like you, because it's you. You're the salesperson, you're the technician, you're the bottle washer, you're the whatever. You're the garbage emptier. You do it all. Well, that means it's even more incumbent on you to do the extra effort to begin to learn those things of how to recognize differences, how to talk to differences, how to hold those open spaces, how to do all of that. Excuse me. I actually think it's one of the reasons that a lot of solo businesses fail is because they kind of go down the same road that they know how to do. And unfortunately, that's usually not strong enough to build a business that actually can grow and succeed and last.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I've done it myself recently, where because I do a lot of my stuff myself, where I've actually brought somebody in to help me with some of the other stuff, with kind of editing and shooting some of the social media stuff that I do, because I've realized that I don't have the skill set right now to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If I was going to do it, I'd do it a very specific way that's probably not going to work. So I kind of need to branch out and have that extra skill set. It's not to say I can't ever get there, but if I want to do it now at the level I want to do it, and then I need to bring somebody in, and bringing that person in is also then challenges my creative process, what I'm producing, why I'm producing it, and it's actually that two-way conversation with another person. It's actually getting me to think about what am I doing and why am I doing it, which is then kind of accelerating my learning a little bit, really. Whereas if it was just me, I probably wouldn't question myself most of the time, not unless an issue came up or a problem happened, and that's when I would question myself. So having somebody there just generally questioning you, on a regular basis really changes the dynamic massively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's part of that. And again, you can do that by hiring people. You can do that by even just, this is where even just masterminds and these sorts of things where you plug in with other folks always has some sort of value to it, just in that fact that you're exposing yourself to more diversity of viewpoints, which if you're open to that, if you've already made a decision that you're going to be open to that, it's going to lead to growth. This could be hiring a coach, this could be hiring a consultant, this could be hiring an employee, but it also could be plugging into masterminds, finding mentors, finding other people around you, even just reading books. I mean, most Americans, I'll speak to my country, most Americans have not read a book from cover to cover since they graduated high school. They maybe did in college. That's it. That they're done. And that's shameful, because reading a book, again, can expose yourself to new ideas, new viewpoints. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a big thing to start doing that. Watching good YouTube videos. So I'm not talking about scrolling through cat videos for 4.5 hours. Not that I've ever done that, but those sorts of things. It's actually sitting down and going, let me go find some content on this topic and expose myself to it and learn more. So it's that idea of lifelong learning is, again, one of the fundamental things that you have to make a decision that you want to do that, and then actually create the time, create the space, create the money to be able to actually do that. And it could be a very small investment to start with, but I encourage people to set aside a certain amount of time, a certain amount of money for thinking, for learning, for doing all of those different areas where, again, especially as a solopreneur, usually all you're doing is doing. You carve no time for thinking or for learning new things. You only have time for doing, and then you wonder why you end up failing. Well, because eventually you come to the end of your rope.
Yeah, and that's it. And like I say, that's the beauty of a coach generally as well, because I've done coaching myself as sports coaching mostly.
Hmm?
Having a coach is somebody kind of challenging you and questioning you, so it's quite a good process. If somebody's not had like any formal coaching before, any kind of coaching, it's a really good process if you get a good coach, because they're not telling you what to do, which is what a lot of people think it is.
Yeah, that's advising. That's a different
Yeah,
role.
yeah, they're not telling you what to do. They're actually pulling the information out of you. They're challenging you, asking you questions that makes you develop and grow
Mhm.
in all areas, and sometimes just playing devil's advocate, just to think about things and put you in that mindset to think about things in a different way. And I
Well, or
think there's
challenge you to come up with more ideas. You've only come up with 2 possibilities. There's got to be more than 2. Let's come up with more than 2. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's such a huge benefit from doing that. So I think it's, if you can't find somebody, because, I see it on the internet and a lot of places where people say, oh, find a mentor, find a mentor. It's not always that easy. And unfortunately, sometimes you need to get somebody because even getting a mentor, somebody who's really good business person, for instance, may still not be the best coach for you or the best person to develop you or
Mhm.
bring you along, because they may not have that, A, they might not have the time for you, and B, they might not be able to kind of ask the right questions and challenge you in that way, because maybe their mindset is elsewhere and the way they think is completely different.
Well, and honestly, mentorship and coaching are 2 different roles. And again, getting back to that good or bad. So I talk about modalities, and as a coach, I could take on different modalities. So it's not that, one person is always in one of these. You could have one person be in more than one modality. But, there's consulting. This is where I have a specific solution, you have a specific problem. I come and apply my specific solution to your specific problem. By the way, that's a valuable thing. If you need to learn how to run Facebook ads, hire a consultant, because that's the person that they know how to do Facebook ads. They can come in and help you learn how to do or do it for you. Either way, Facebook ads. That's consulting. Mentoring is somebody who specifically has walked. Mentoring is somebody who specifically walked a really similar role to you, and who's a couple of steps ahead of you at least, who's willing to sit down and kind of say, hey, let me guide you on this path. So a mentor in a job usually has been in that job before. They've said at least something very similar to that job before. It's not somebody who's completely different and doesn't have the specific knowledge. And again, they're kind of taking on an active advising role, like, here's what worked for me, here's what you might want to try, that kind of thing. Coaching is, like you said, a lot of times it's more asking questions. It's more engaging with people and figuring out where they're coming from. It's more getting curious. It's those sorts of things that happen. You also have teaching, which is I come in and I have specific knowledge and I go through and educate you on that specific skill or knowledge. All of these are valuable, by the way. None of these are good or bad. The problem comes in when you hire someone thinking they're a coach and then they act as a consultant or an advisor and they're telling you what to do. Well, they're not really coaching now. It's not that it's bad. It's just that's not the role that they're telling. So, and honestly, at different points in your life, you need all of these kinds of roles. Sometimes you need to hire a consultant. Sometimes you need a mentor. Sometimes you need a coach. Sometimes you need all 3. It's not that they're good or bad. It's that they just serve different purposes. And so when you're aware of that, and you could work with a mentor who also kind of changes their mentor hat, takes that off and puts on a coach hat and now starts asking you questions and engaging with you as a coach. You could have a consultant that does that as well. And you could have a coach that also can mentor, and you can have a coach that also, so these aren't, again, they're not like one person, one role all the time. There's some give and take. But it is one of those things where you want to make sure that the person you're working with is aware of what role are they taking and then is able to fulfill that role. Because if you get a mentor when you wanted a coach, you're not going to be happy and they're going to be frustrated too.
Yeah, that's true. And also, as well, the way I look at it as well. So, in a lot of my earlier episodes on the podcast, I talked with a lot of like therapists and people who have been through therapy and stuff like that.
That's another role, counseling.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, it's also about finding that. So, like
the right one,
not just the right therapist. So it's the same with coaching, right? It's finding the right coach for the job, because the right coach will be somebody that you can kind of get along with, who you accept their challenges of stuff in a positive way and that kind of thing. Because otherwise, if you take it negatively and you kind of butt heads a bit and it's it becomes a bit messy, you're probably not going to get the best out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have to have, and again, does that mean that they have to believe like you, look like you, sound like you, act like it? Not necessarily, but it does mean that there has to be some level of gelling between the two of you. I've actually had clients that I've met with, well, prospects, really not clients yet. And, people that I've met with, and in talking to them, it's like, you know what, I'm not the best coach for you, but I know somebody, let me introduce you to them, because they're going to be a better fit for you. They have more knowledge or skill in that area. They have more expertise in that area, whatever it is. It could be, sometimes that's demographic stuff like age, sex, that kind of thing. But sometimes it's also just where they came from, So as an example, I know some coaches that work only with people that have gone through widows and widowers, that have gone through that kind of that grief cycle. When I have somebody that's what they're dealing with, I could help them, but man, they're going to get a lot better served by that person that's worked with 300 people just like them, and so I'll make a recommendation and a referral and get them over to those folks. So it's that idea of being aware and being self-aware enough that even as the coach, you recognize, I don't have to be the perfect coach for everybody or the right coach for everybody. I can't possibly be. So it's good to kind of have that idea, and then as the person looking for a coach, you have to be open to the idea that you may meet with somebody and go, you know what, this isn't a good fit. I want to keep looking. That's okay. You're not wrong to do that. Actually, I would encourage you to do that.
Yeah, it's important from both sides as well, really. It's from the coach's perspective as well, to think, right, if I can't actually help you, or I'm not going to get through to you, there's a communication barrier, or there's whatever the reason may be, then it's important that both sides accept that and be like, well, maybe a different solution or a different coach is probably the best way to go, because it's not going to serve either of you if you're both stuck in in that kind of coaching relationship where nothing's happening and you're probably not communicating very well or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I don't want to push a rope. That's not fun. And part of what we do in coaching is accountability. And if you're not going to accept any sort of accountability with the coach because of, personality conflicts and that sort of thing, it's just not going to be a successful coaching relationship. Because like you said, when they ask that question, you're going to perceive that as an attack when it's really not. That kind of thing, it's not going to be healthy. It's not going to be helpful. Same thing happens in therapy. Therapists, I work with a lot of counselors and therapists, and I work with a lot of folks that are also going through counseling or therapy, because again, coaching and therapy, different roles, different modalities. Sometimes you need both. That the same thing. I know therapists all the time. They're very open to referring to another therapist or another specialist, because it's like, no. You need to find the right therapist that you can have a good relationship with to have that growth. Same thing goes, by the way, if you're looking for something like a mastermind group, you need to find the right mastermind group. So all of those are relationships that you have to be open to, but just recognize that the right group doesn't necessarily mean a group that all looks like you, acts like you, sounds like you. You still want that diversity. You want to be exposed to different ideas, that kind of thing. That's valuable as well. So be open to that.
Yeah, you definitely need that element and that kind of diversity of thinking and challenge. You just need to have it communicated in a way that you will be receptive to, I suppose. I suppose that's what we're getting at mostly.
Yeah, I've worked with some clients that, from a worldview perspective, from that kind of thing, we're completely different, not any similarities at all. And yet usually if they're open to it and I'm open to it, we can work together very well. Because in fact, I love it, because usually what it ends up doing is I get exposed to a worldview in a way that I really get exposed to it, and I have to be non-judgmental about it. That's part of my job as a coach. And so I really have to listen and I really have to get curious. I think it helps me grow. And so I love it as a coach whenever the client is not exactly like me. That's actually, for me, that's kind of fun. But again, they have to be open to that as well. Otherwise it's not going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to like why coaching is so important. So I found a research study by the University of Pennsylvania before we came online, and they've got data. I didn't pull the actual figures, but they've got data that shows that kind of small incremental behavior changes and and improvements is much more sustainable than these kind of drastic overhaul attempts or any kind of attempt to like change and be completely different. So that's why coaching is so powerful, because that small constant evolution, if you will just lead to so much more sustainable change and benefit in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot of times people come to things wanting to, quote, hit the ball out of the park. Use the health example. They want to get on a diet and lose all this weight and do all of that. And then you see them a year later and they're right back to where they were before, because the diet didn't stick, because they did this kind of massive change, as opposed to beginning to examine their life and go, where could I add a little bit more physical activity? Where could I change what I eat a little bit? Where could I do these smaller changes? And maybe they don't lose 50 pounds in some really short amount of time, but over a longer time, they actually lose the weight, maintain the weight, and look better and act better. And it's really just become part of who they are. This is who they are. Same thing happens with anything else, whether it's limiting beliefs, whether it's business, all of these things. You're right. What you're really looking for is the 1% kind of change, where you just tweak something. Okay,
Yeah.
now let's let that live, and let's sustain that. And then it becomes a habit and it becomes part of your identity. It becomes what you do. If you get up every morning and you spend 5 minutes in quiet time, meditation, prayer, that kind of thing, and you do that for 20 years, well, it's just part of what you do. You just get up every morning and you do that. It's a habit. It becomes part of your identity. So it's less about changing everything and making these massive changes, and more about looking for those small steps that you can take. And then what you do is you look up and you discover that those actually change huge amounts of things. And they often change things that aren't even directly related to what you're doing. So like people getting better with their money. I work with tons of people, they get better with their money, and then they look up after like 5 or 6 months and they're like, I'm losing weight. Why am I losing weight? I'm not trying to lose weight. I'm working on my money. It's like, yeah, but as you get disciplined in the money area, you naturally start looking at other areas of your life and getting more disciplined in those areas. And now all of a sudden you're eating better, you're exercising more. And you didn't set out to do that. It just spills over. So especially in keystone areas, money is one, health is one, relationships, these sort of big areas of your life. Looking for places that you can do small improvements in those keystone areas naturally spills over and improves all the other areas of your life.
Yeah, and I think those like small changes it's because they're effective and we're able to sustain them over a period
They
of time,
stick.
right? And then this is, like you say, it's that marginal gains, that 1%. Whereas, at the start, like January's the perfect example, isn't it? Everybody's on a diet, everybody's training, and doing, keeping fit or whatever, but it won't last because they've just gone over the top. And I think people often kind of confuse busyness with effectiveness. Actually, what's effective is what we're going to consistently do over time. That's what's going to tell in the long run. Whereas, being busy now and doing loads of stuff, you probably get really disheartened because you've done so much and you're not going to get the necessarily get the results that you want.
Yeah.
And you're going to be disheartened, and then you're going to completely fall off the wagon, and it's going to be, really difficult to recover from there.
We use busy almost as a badge of honor nowadays. I mean, if you think about it, whenever somebody asks how you're doing, there's kind of two answers that are almost acceptable. One is, I'm doing fine, which is really basically shorthand for thank you for asking, but I don't want to have a conversation with you. And the other is I'm busy. That's kind of what we say almost as a knee-jerk response to how you doing. Oh, I'm busy. Everything's busy. It's busy. As if busy is somehow some sort of badge of honor. And really, like you said, all busy means is you're doing a lot of stuff. Doesn't necessarily mean you're doing anything important. I mean, technically, you could be busy all day by digging a hole in one side of your yard, wheelbarrowing the dirt to the other side of the yard, making a dirt pile, and then the next day, loading up the wheelbarrow and putting the dirt back in the hole. Do that every day for the next 6 weeks. You're busy. Most of us, a knee-jerk reaction is, oh, that's horrible. I would never want to do that. Exactly, but that's busy. That's what busy is. It's just doing a lot of stuff. Productive or effective, as you said, is about actually stepping back and examining it and putting some margin in your life. It's about doing the things that are actually important. It's about figuring out what are the things that are kind of moving the needle. What are those keystone areas that I can get a little better in, and getting rid of some of the stuff that's really just, quote, moving dirt from one side of the yard to the other. I mean, not literally, but trust me, there are things you are doing in your life that are exactly like that, and if you can get rid of some of those, all of a sudden now you have time to do the stuff that's actually important. So one trick, by the way, I'll give a quick tip just so people walk away with something actionably, is you are no longer allowed to say, I don't have time for that. Anytime you find yourself saying, I don't have time for that, change it to this sentence. That's not a priority to me. If you can say that's not a priority to me and not feel guilty, okay, it's really not a priority for you. Just don't do it. If, on the other hand, when you say that's not a priority to me, you feel sort of like, oh, that doesn't feel so good. I'll give you an example in a second. Then probably you need to rearrange your life so you can do that thing. So as an example, I have seen busy business owners say, I don't have time to go to my kid's soccer game. And nobody will bat an eye. People look at, yeah, you're a busy guy. I get it. You're a busy gal. You don't have time for that. But if they were to say out loud to somebody else, you know what? It's not a priority for me to go to my kid's soccer game. Now all of a sudden people kind of look at them and go, oh, it's like, really? That's not a priority to you? And guess what? You might rearrange your life so you can go to your kid's soccer game. And I use that as an example, but it's really just a small tweak. It's just changing the language that you use. But by doing that, you bounce that off a different part of your brain and you go, yeah, that doesn't feel so good. Maybe I'll do something different. And you kind of change your activity and change your behavior.
Yeah, and it comes back to where we started as well a little bit, Scott, where ultimately you got to kind of know what you want from life, right? You got to kind of take that step back, look at the bigger picture, think, right, what do I want out of my life, and figure that out. Because once you know that, you can prioritize effectively. Then you can look at what you're going to do and say, does this fit into what I want my life to be for a start? Yep. If it doesn't, it's an easy rid of, and get rid of it. If it does, great. And like the same with business, is it going to move the needle forward? If not, why am I wasting my time?
Why am I doing
it? Yeah. So it's about getting that balance right.
Yeah. It's having. You're right. It's about intentionality. It's about setting a plan. This is why all this stuff works. Why do you do a budget? Which, by the way, by definition, a budget is a plan. So it's done before the event. Why do you plan your day? Why do you do these things? Because until you've got a plan or a direction or a destination, there's no possible way to know if you're even going the right way. You got to step back and figure out, what do I want my business to become? I tell people, it's kind of asking that question, what do I want to be when I grow up? And by the way, I don't care how old you are, you can still ask that question. I still ask that question all the time. What do I want my life to look like? What do I want my relationships to look like? What do I want my money to look like? What do I want my career to look like? My business, my whatever. You can put any filter you want, and then actually being intentionally about thinking about that, and then actually being intentional about examining what you're doing and saying, yeah, I can move towards that. And that's, back to, I told you I was writing the second book, my first book, which is called Inspired Living. That's basically what it's about, is that how do you go through that exercise of examining your life so that you can both come up with a plan, and then what do you do to actually start working towards that plan? And so it takes a lot of those ideas that we've been talking about and kind of lays them out.
Yeah, and I think that's it. That is important, because a lot of us don't necessarily know how to do that. A lot of us, I don't think it's necessarily our fault either. I think we spend all these years in education and, with our families and that. I don't think once anybody's ever kind of, everybody says, "Oh, what job are you going to do when you grow up? What you going to do?" But nobody asks, like, how do you want your life to look? Like, because what job you get depends on how you want your life to look and how you want it to pan out. And there's lots of other things and other areas that we need to look at. And again, rather than look at it just through one lens, right? You just need this job, because it's just presumed that you'll just get a house, you'll get married, you'll have a mortgage, and all that stuff is just presumed and kind of pushed on us, really. So you have to get a good education, you have to get a good job. Well, do you? What if you want to start your own business? What if you want to kind of explore that, a bit of freedom? And what if especially when you're young, you just leave school, you want to travel the world and get new experiences, or do work part time and do something else?
Well,
I think we force people into these boxes sometimes.
Yeah, and even what is a good job? I mean, just going just to that one little part, you're supposed to get a good job. Well, yeah, but does that mean what your parents think is a good job? Does that mean what you think is a good job? Does that mean what your wife thinks is a good job? Does that mean what your best friend? Because guess what? All of those people might have a different definition for what is a good job. What does success actually look like?
Exactly, because
People define it
ultimately
different.
they do, and I think unfortunately a lot of people just think it's just money.
Yeah,
More money
you're
is
absolutely right.
more money is a good job, but not necessarily. Not if that job makes you absolutely miserable, then it's not a better job. Then you're probably better off earning half that and enjoying yourself and being happy, enjoying life, enjoying what you do for a living.
So I was a school teacher for 16 years. I loved it. And then I went into the corporate world for 11 years. I actually really enjoyed it. There were a lot of things about it that I loved. And now I'm a coach, a full-time coach. I've been doing that since 2017 full-time, 2011 part-time. And what's interesting is, first off, I've been luckily and fortunate in that I've always left something I love to go to something I love. I haven't ever had that experience of really having a job that I hated, because I've just been very intentional about the kind of work that I do. And so that's helped me. But what's interesting is, so I left a corporate job making, very high six-figure kind of income, all of these perks, all of these benefits, to launch my own business. You know how many people told me I was freaking nuts, and said, "Oh my goodness, oh, that's horrible. Why would you ever do that? You just got dream life. You had all that." Yeah, but now I get to work from home. I've worked with people in 20 countries. I've worked with people in 38 states. I get to go have lunch with my wife. I get to take off days when I want to. I've still got a decent income. I'm still able to provide for my family and do everything that I want to do. So maybe I wasn't so crazy to have made that change, But empirically, from the outside, people immediately are like, "Oh no, that's crazy to do that." But is it crazy if that's really what I wanted? Absolutely not.
Yeah, everybody thinks about stability and safety, and having a business, I think you remove all that stability and safety because it's all on you, essentially, especially if you're a solopreneur or whatever. But I think there's something, obviously, having a purpose, like we discussed earlier, and like working for people and having a purpose and feeling part of that big picture is one thing. working your own purpose is another level again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when it's your purpose and your big picture, I don't think people quite understand that until they do it.
Well, and I would argue that for some people, not for everybody, but if you stop and think for a minute, when you're a W-2 employee, so you work a job, you get paid, every 2 weeks, money shows up in the bank, that kind of thing. W-2 job, it was what we call that here in the US, but you're kind of working that employee position. Really and truly, you are still actually self-employed, because what happens if you don't show up for 2 weeks and don't call them? You're fired. So you still could do that. You're in complete control of your own time. You could just stop showing up. You could do a terrible job. You could do all of these things. So you are still self-employed in terms of the fact that you still have to do the work and do the job and do the activity and do whatever. And in a way, you're self-employed with one client, that company. And if that company doesn't like the job you're doing, they get rid of you. Or if that company goes out of business, you're now without a job. Or if that company, there's a million ways that with one client in one position, things could go wrong. In some ways, when you're a business owner and you've got multiple clients, you've got multiple services, and you've got multiple things that you do, in some ways, you're more stable, not less stable. Now, in other ways, yes, you're less stable because you're the person that has to go out and get business. You have to make sure that you're doing a good job. You have to do all of that. There's a lot of responsibility on you as the business owner that when you're an employee, you don't have. You just, that's not your decision. You don't have to worry about it. But so it's both less stable and more stable at the same time. Again, we're back to that both and, not either or. But when we look at it, we look at W-2 employee, stable job, self-employed, not stable. And yet the truth is that's not necessarily the true dichotomy.
Yeah, it's just it's the way that it's framed, isn't it? And again, it's how you frame it that matters, and how we look at it. But that's always kind of the way that it's kind of pushed
Yeah,
to most people
that's
through
what
school
society
and
tells us.
parents. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think also the skills you get from being a business owner and being able to get clients, because once you can get your own clients and you can maintain it, you can deliver a service or a product wherever it may be, and you have that confidence that then actually I could do that again.
Right.
So even if things start to go
Even if
badly,
this idea doesn't work out, I
yeah,
could do this.
I've learned how to do this now. I can do marketing. I can do I can do sales calls or wherever it may be. There's all these extra skills that now I have this extra string to my bow. I can acquire clients, which it can be game changing, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It again, done with the right attitude and the right approach, people can do it well. Now, a lot of the studies will tell you that most small businesses fail in the first 5 years, all of these sorts of stats that you hear. By the way, they're all true. They're not wrong. But some of that, again, gets back to kind of the theme through all of this is if you go into it with a technical mindset. So this is what happens, unfortunately. A lot of folks, it's like, I'm good at this skill. I'm good at fixing air conditioners. Therefore, I'm going to go open my own HVAC, heating and air company, and I'm going to be the owner because the owner's making all this money. I'm the employee. I'm not making a lot of money. I'm going to go open my own business. But they don't actually learn the other skills. They're really good at fixing air conditioners, but they don't learn how to get clients. They don't learn how to train employees. They don't learn how to manage the books. They don't learn how to, and it's not that they have to be the person that does all of that work. You can hire people for those things. But even if you hire people, you as the owner, the buck still stops with you. You still have to be the one keeping your eye on the ball. You still have to be the one making sure it's happening. You still have to manage the situation. You still have to define what should be happening. You're setting the expectations and all of that. So no matter what, you've got to learn some level of competence in all of these other areas. And a lot of times people don't see that. They don't understand that. They go into the business not realizing that that's part of their job. And because of that, they end up 3 to 5 years later, they're out of business and they're back to being an employee. And by the way, that may be perfect. If that's where you want to be, there is nothing wrong with being an employee. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying employee bad, business owner good. I'm saying if you want to be a business owner, you've got to take a different approach than just being good at the skill that you're doing or the technical thing that you're doing or the service you're providing. You've got to learn a bunch of other things. You got to develop more fully. And that takes intentionality. That takes purpose. That a lot of times business owners go into it not realizing they have to do all of those things, and it sets them up for failure.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a shock to the system, can't it? Scott, where can people find you if they want to kind of get in touch with you or learn a bit more about you?
Absolutely. So I actually set up a page just for your listeners. So if you go over to my website, which is inspiredstewardship.com, and then just put in / and they, not like us, all one word, no spaces, no underlines, nothing like that. So it's inspiredstewardship.com / they, not like us. If you do that, you'll find a page there. There's a place you can connect with me. There's some free resources that folks can download and get access to that will walk them through some of the stuff that we've been talking about today. I mentioned my book, that's on there. I have a podcast, that's on there. So all of that stuff is on there, including a way you could jump on and have a 30-minute meeting with me if you're interested in learning more about what I do. And again, that's at inspiredstewardship.com / they, not like us.
Scott, thank you so much. It's been amazing having you on the show, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Take care. Thanks again for being part of this journey. Stay tuned. We've got even more great conversations coming your way.